Welcome everyone to another episode of my podcast, and as my regular listeners will always know, I'm always delighted to have my guests on, and today is no different. Today we have the brilliant Daniel Hulme, the CEO of Satalia, and we are going to talk about rethinking AI. Daniel and I were talking in the green room, my imaginary green room, beforehand, and Daniel's got some really interesting takes on this, which even made me think about how I position having more data, better data, access to data, and what that might mean. So strap in for this one, folks, because I think Daniel is going to challenge some of the thinking in a positive way. But Daniel, I always start off my my podcast this way. So before we kind of get into it, kind of Daniel Hulme, kind of who, what, why, when, where, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I have over 20 years academic experience in AI. My undergraduate, my master's, PhD, postdocs, all in AI. I ran a master's program where I had hundreds of students going out there applying these technologies to solving problems across a whole range of different businesses. And I'm currently an entrepreneur in residence for UCL, which is where I've done all of my AI, where I help them take deep technology and spin it out. I did spin out a company from UCL over a decade ago, Satalia, which builds AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. And we were acquired by WPP just over a year ago, and I take on the role of Chief AI Officer across WPP. And I guess my role there is trying to understand how to make sure that we're using these technologies for cool instead of creepy.
Cool instead of creepy. I like that. Before we kind of get into why we should be rethinking AI and the narrative around it, can you, treat me like an idiot, and trust me, that's not hard. What is AI, artificial intelligence, in lay terms?
So there's a whole lot of definitions that fly around. And the probably more popular one and weak one, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. So over the past decade, we've managed to get machines to do things that traditionally only human beings can do. We can get them to correspond in natural language like chatbots. We can recognize objects and images. And when we get machines to do things that humans can do, and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. Now, I would argue that humans are not intelligent. There is plenty of books out there that validates that argument. So benchmarking machines against humans is a very silly thing to do. I did my master's on intelligence, actually. There's a very good definition for intelligence, which we should be using for the definition of AI, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. So those are essentially systems that are able to make decisions towards a goal, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so that next time they can make better decisions. And if I was being brutally honest, according to that definition, nobody's really doing AI in industry, because most systems in production don't adapt themselves. They don't learn. And by the way, I would also say we don't need to have machine learning to have AI. There's often a mistake where we synonymize these two things. And there's a whole load of other definitions out there. You'll hear things like strong AI and weak AI, narrow AI, even general AI and super intelligence. And again, I find almost all of those definitions useless, because really we only do one thing in industry, which is we build very specific solutions to solve very specific problems. And over the past several years, based on all of the work that I've been doing, I actually think there are 6 categories of applications of technologies that have emerged over the past couple of decades that are a much more interesting and useful way to think about AI.
Okay, awesome. That sounds all good. And I am guilty of using those words such as narrow, general, super, singularity, all that kind of fun, that fun stuff. So slap on the wrist for me. But that's why I wanted to get you on, Daniel, to educate myself as much as my amazing audience. So maybe we'll get into those six applications. But I think this segues nicely into why you are suggesting we need to rethink AI. So around rethinking AI, let's dig into that further and kind of go with it wherever you feel we should.
Yeah, I think the reason why we should rethink it and not be using these definitions is because, again, unfortunately it gets synonymized with technology, or it gets synonymized with a certain type of technologies that are good at doing a certain thing. And I think that what's happening is that governments and companies are making poor decisions based on this noise or lack of understanding or lack of clarity around what these technologies are good and bad at. So, we're seeing a lot of companies hiring data scientists, my students, machine learning experts, because it's become quite sexy over the past decade. We're very good now at being able to extract insights from data. In ways that we've never been able to do before using machine learning. But what we fail to realize is that by giving human beings better insights doesn't tend to lead to better decisions. And so I would argue that what we need to do is we need to always start out with the problem that needs to get solved, and then work backwards. What are the decisions that help us make that problem, that solve that problem? What are the insights that help us make the better decisions? And then what data is required to extract the insights? We tend, and we're all guilty of this. We get excited about new technologies, new capability, and then do a bottom up. Let's build data lakes. Let's hire some people who have these skills and hope that somehow drives value in our businesses. And the reality is that it won't, because we fail to remember that what we're ultimately trying to do is solve for a particular problem, and then ask ourselves, what's the right technology, the right approach to actually solve it.
And it's interesting hearing you talk, because I just finished Tom Goodwin's book, the second edition of Digital Darwinism, and he kind of talks through a different kind of perspective around we're all guilty of forcing new technology on old processes rather than thinking about what is the new technology designed to do. Should we even be using it? And if we are going to use it, maybe we need to rethink the process that will actually get the best use out of the technology. And I reflect on, the world of sales and marketing and where we are at the moment in that journey, and data is the new oil seems to be coming back up again in terms of that narrative. So you raise your eyebrows there. And also this promise of AI being the panacea for things around better forecasting or predictive marketing technology or helping your sellers do the right thing at the right time. And I've been guilty about, building the narrative that the analysts out there make money on, let's be honest, in terms of these predictions over the next 5 years, that if you have machine learning / AI technology layered over what you're doing, then in theory, that will then help you have better insight to make a better decision about something. But reflecting on what you're saying, reflecting on, what the likes of the Toms of the world are saying, are we getting swept up into, let's just put new tech on things without actually unpacking the problem and the root cause of the problem and taking that approach, rather than going, machine learning must be this, or we've got to your point, got to get data scientists or what have you.
Exactly. Again, absolutely. And maybe this is a useful point to talk about the 6 applications. So the first one is actually task automation. I know that there are lots of memes around the internet saying if then else then statements are AI. In some respects, there are things that human beings do, basic tasks that can be replaced by relatively simple algorithms, whether they be macros or whether they be robotic process automation, so figuring out where people are clicking and just repeating that, or basic machine vision or machine natural language algorithms. We can actually create a huge amount of value in replacing those very specific tasks with simple algorithms. They don't have to be complicated. So that's the first set of applications, and we're seeing a lot of benefit in using basic task automation. The second category is generative AI. So we're able to obviously now use these technologies to generate content, whether it be images or text or audio or video. And what we're using this for in WPP and is to augment the creative process. Can we use AI to augment the creative, giving them new ideas that can ultimately lead to campaigns that drive more clicks? They're not able to at the moment create the end content, but they're coupled and with the creative to make their lives easier. The second category is an interesting one, which is the humanization of AI. And what I mean by that is we're able to take a human being, which is the interface, and replace it by something that looks, feels, and behaves like a human being. And so much so that we don't know any different. And by the way, each one of these categories raise certain ethical questions, safety questions. So, for example, if I'm going to a website, I'm interacting with an avatar that I think is a human being, the best thing I can do if I'm that website is to leverage a human bias, which is homophily. So we tend to like to engage with people that are like ourselves. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a hipster and I'm coming to a website and I want, and the best thing that I can do is render essentially a hipster that looks a little bit like me, maybe a female version of me, I don't know, that's able to sell me goods because it's more likely to yield a better result. Now, does homophily then enforce bigotry? Does it reduce diversity? These questions need to be addressed. Also, should I declare that I've declared that I'm not a bot when I go to a website? Should we declare that we are engaging with bots? So anyway, there's the third category is the humanization. So replacing the human interface by something that looks like a human interface, which raises interesting questions. The fourth category, which is, I guess, what everybody is excited about, which is machine learning. We are able to extract now complex correlations, insights from lots of different data in ways that human beings have never been able to do, and then surface those insights, but also explain how those correlations exist to help us understand the world in new and interesting ways. So from a kind of marketing lens, they can help us understand new personas, identify new types of human behaviors, in ways that we've never been able to do before, to be able to leverage. Again, those technologies are very, very good at augmenting human beings that can then take those insights, and ultimately the idea is they're able to make better decisions. We're seeing a lot of emphasis in machine learning and data science. I would argue that we probably shouldn't start there. We should start with the fifth category, which is around complex decision making. So these are actually old technologies. This is what used to be called operations research, discrete mathematics, optimization. This is around complex decision making. So again, going back to this idea of staffing salespeople. So if I've got 5 salespeople that I want to allocate to 5 jobs, I have 120 possible ways I can allocate 5 jobs, 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. If I have 15 people to allocate to 15 jobs, I now have 1 trillion ways of allocating them, 15 times 40. If I've got 60 people to allocate to 60 jobs, I now have more possible combinations than I have atoms in the universe. Right. So humans can typically solve problems up to about 7. Industry have problems with thousands of the moving parts. What we should be doing is we should be getting machines to automate those complex decisions. So again, going back to this idea, I could use machine learning to predict that hipsters are going to be coming into my store, but then I need to figure out what are the right salespeople to allocate to that store to maximize my yield. Resource allocation is an incredibly complex decision-making problem, probably being solved by a human being badly. So that's the 5th category. The 6th and final category, by the way, the 5th category we're seeing a lot of benefit from. So these technologies really are able to move the needle. And the final category is essentially the extension of your physical self, both in the physical world and the digital world. So this is exoskeletons, this is cybernetics, and even augmenting your digital avatar in the metaverse that will ultimately be making decisions on your behalf. So those I believe are actually the 6 categories we should be looking through. And actually they're also combinable. They're building blocks. You can combine them. And then when I'm looking at frictions in an organization, I'm asking myself, okay, which of these 6 categories does that friction map against? And then what are the right technologies? What are the right skills? What are the right processes to be able to then solve that particular problem?
My brain is just hurting. I've learned a new word, homophily, so thank you for that. I'll need to go figure out how to spell that. So okay, wow. I mean, I want to go straight to generative AI, but I'm not, because I think that's really cool. But in terms of
we can talk about generative AI.
We will do, but I think it's the complex decision. It's that analogy you gave of allocating salespeople to do something, but that could be any employee to do
it could actually be any resource that you need to allocate to some sort of demand. It could be your marketing spend. What channel should I put in my marketing spend to maximize my yield? Anything more than 7 you shouldn't be using a human for. It could be delivering packages. So any resource allocation that requires you to deal with, things more than 7 is probably one of these complex decision-making problems.
Which for the majority of my audience, I would suggest is, going to be in their world. And so then what I'm trying to kind of unpack in my head is at the top of the kind of the hour you mentioned that we shouldn't get swayed into AI being the solution to all and this and that and machine learning and all this kind of stuff. Yet in this category, you're saying that actually complex decision making is where this is the right place to do it. However, and again, I'm not a data scientist, I'm going to make some assumptions that you need the data, and the data needs to be good data, and you need to have that question, I guess, at the other end that you're trying to answer.
Yeah.
So can we unpack that a little further in terms of what the thought process might be to get to that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really glad you're asking that. I very rarely get asked that question. But what I've just described is essentially an optimization problem. And the optimization matured in academia a few decades ago. Which is why now everybody's getting excited about machine learning. But an optimization problem has several parts. The first part is an objective function. So going back to my the workforce allocation problem, what you want to do, your objective is to maximize utilization. Is to maybe minimize travel time. You don't want people driving longer distances. You want to maximize maybe client continuity, so they're seeing the same faces over again. You want to maximize freeing up free time, free weeks, so people can do training, etc., etc. So you essentially have some sort of complex objective function. And then you have constraints, which is people can only work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. This person's not allowed to work with this client because they upset them, blah, 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 blah. So you've got a bunch of constraints. Yeah. And then what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have the data to be able to satisfy those constraints. So for example, a constraint might be people don't work on their birthdays. I need to be able to then get access to birthday data. And once you've framed that problem, which is the goal that you're trying to achieve, subject to the constraints, and you've got the data coming in, then you then solve that problem algorithmically. Now, again, human beings, unfortunately, are solving these problems algorithmically. And just to give you an example, one of our clients is PwC. They have 5,000 auditors that they need to allocate to projects over the year. 5,000 factorial is a big number. And you used to have 20 people in a room who's trying to figure out how to solve that maths problem, whose full-time job it is. We can build an algorithm that can solve that problem in 4 hours, significantly better than a human being. So instead of them solving that problem, what they can do now is they can run multiple scenarios. They can say, if we optimized for utilization of client continuity, this is what our KPIs would look like. If we optimized for the environment, i.e. reduction in travel time, over client satisfaction, then this is what the other KPIs. So they can become much more strategic. So what you want to do is you want to solve those types of problems algorithmically. And you're right, you need to define what the objective is, what the constraints are, and then make the data better over time.
And I'm just reflecting on time, you know who I'm talking to, but I won't mention the brand in terms of spent with them recently unpacking all of what their technology could do. And it's a really cliche phrase, but we don't know what we don't know. So therefore, on the constraints bit, you don't know what you don't know in terms of what the constraints might be. Therefore, you may miss a constraint because you're not aware that that's actually a constraint in the first place. So how do organizations then ensure that, we'll park the data quality bit for a moment because everybody knows that's a challenge in its own right, but ensuring that to the best of your knowledge that you are accounting for all the possible constraints that might be so that you don't push the button. And for those of us that are old enough, I don't know if I've had the Big Bertha cartoon just pop into my head. I don't know if you remember Big Bertha, when you put something in the conveyor belt that came out on the other side, you pull the big lever, that all of a sudden the machine is doing what you're asking it to do, but it's giving an output that could then take an organization down a path which ends up being damaging or what have you?
Sure. Actually, there are three important things here. One is you're absolutely right. Capturing those constraints completely is a very hard problem. But that's where you have to work with the client. You have to make it iterative. You build a schedule, for example, whether it be a people planning schedule or some routing schedule. And some expert will say, you can't do that. You can't do that because it's their birthday and they don't work on their birthdays. It's okay. Let's have that constraint. So you actually just have to go through that process of iteration. And it's also often why people buy off the shelf tools and they don't work, because they only capture 70% of the constraints, and they don't allow you to add more constraints, because, So I do caution people buying modules that ERPs are trying to upsell to you, because unfortunately those modules probably will only do 70% of the problem. You typically need to get an organization like us to solve the entire problem. So that's the first thing, is it's an iterative process. The second is, going back to the data, is that you won't get the data right straight away. So going back to the PwC example, it turns out that when you were creating the schedules, graduates were driving really long distances to their clients. And the reason why is because the graduates had kept their parents' addresses in the system, as opposed to, so that showed the data was incorrect, and it got very, very, very quickly, changed. And the third thing to consider is what you're trying to solve for. So one of our clients wanted to focus on maximizing utilization. That was their primary objective. If we can increase utilization by 2.5%, this project will pay for itself. Our algorithms increased utilization by 12.5%. It was a massive success. But what happened is that by moving the needle in utilization, it caused people driving longer distances, clients weren't getting the continuity, people weren't having enough time to train. So what you have to do, you have to understand that these technologies are now phenomenal at moving the needle. They really are. But you need to understand that you're making sure that you're optimizing across a whole set of KPIs and not just one. So now utilization for that client is 4%, but travel time is down 25%, and client satisfaction is up 3%. So those are the things you need to be optimizing for. And that's what these technologies are really, really good at.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking there are so many people I can introduce you to in terms of grappling with the old utilization problem. But I think I'd never, and that's why I wanted to get you on, it's the constraints bit, which I believe people just accept we know what we know without necessarily thinking about the anomalies in the data, or the things that you wouldn't consider to be a constraint maybe 5-10 years ago, because it just was what we did and that was the job, therefore suck it up and get on with it. Whereas we're now in a very different hybrid world, and organizations are trying to figure out how we work in a hybrid world, which I guess, and even with your clients, is producing completely new constraints that nobody had ever considered.
Yeah, and actually this again is important, because most of the time you've got planners that have all of the constraints in their head, and some planners have lots of constraints and some planners don't. So getting out of their heads is important. So again, it's an iterative process. Actually, I believe that we captured the majority of the constraints of most consulting companies. So we've done it for auditors, we've done it for marketing companies as well. Yeah. So we've got a really comprehensive set of constraints there. But there actually is some constraints that you still can't capture. So, for example, you might not religious leanings. You might not be allowed to have one person work with this particular client because of religious considerations, or because they're married to the same people that now some of that data you're actually not allowed to capture. So there will always be outliers that the planners are there to deal with, that the AI just can't solve for because it's not allowed to access the data. But the point is that you're still able to solve 99.99% of it algorithmically,
compared to what you were doing previously, and the time
exactly.
And. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's been illuminating, hopefully illuminating for my guests around. Think about those constraints or the data points as constraints, and what that might mean. Now, let's get into the fun stuff. And we're going to bring the two together around generative AI. Big kind of splash recently about Jasper.ai raising a bunch of cash, now worth more than a billion. Actually, if you look at my about section on my profile, that's written by Jasper. So there's that piece around content creation, but also the humanization aspect. So Synthesia is the one that springs to mind in terms of what they're doing. It's pretty clever, pretty cool, cool stuff. But then there is the deep fake aspect, and there's the deep fake Tom Cruise channel I follow on TikTok, which is just insane in terms of all of that. So let's start with the content creation aspect of generative AI, be it images, and I'm seeing some very weird stuff again on TikTok in terms of what's creating, but also the text aspects. And this is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're moving to the world of kind of GPT-3, Google Pegasus, all that kind of fun stuff. So how good is this? Where are we really on this journey? But where do you believe it might or could go?
Okay, I think good depends on what you want to use it for. And so from a kind of WPP perspective, Satalia is treated as a kind of WPP DeepMind, where we're building out technologies internally to really push the boundaries of creating content and ultimately understanding what leads to clicks and leads sales. And which is what marketing companies have been doing since the dawn of time. How do I create content that leads to success? Yeah. And I guess what these technologies are currently good at is knowing that that's a chair, that's a man, that's a football. And I can also now type in, create a picture with a man holding a football on top of a chair. Yeah. Whether that contains the signals that lead to clicks is a different question. When human beings look at an image, we don't just see a man, a chair, a football. We construct in our minds a narrative that includes nostalgia and history and emotion. And one might argue that construction is 10 times more complex than just the entities that are in that image. And so what we're trying to do is, what we are doing is constructing that narrative, that a human being might construct, and then correlating that narrative with success, which I think is much deeper than what is currently happening with these types of technologies, which is essentially being able to bring objects together in interesting ways. Not only that, is that we are also looking at, from a marketing perspective, are there any rules, creative rules, that you can extract as archetypes for augmenting creativity? What I mean by that is that, in the reason why some campaigns are very successful is because they might contain some sort of contradiction, or they might be using another dimension. They might be asking you to kind of look outside of the box, or they might be having some sort of cultural reference or some sort of comedic aspect. Once that narrative has been created beyond the entities that are in the image, the question then for us is, can you extract these archetypes? Can you determine that there's some sort of inversion happening here, where the human being might be the slave for the robot, for example, which is a twist. So that's some of the work that we're working on inside WPP, is really, really trying to get an understanding of content in the same way that humans do, and correlating that with success. And then the question is, can you create content that contains those contradictions, those cultural references? And we think that we can. We think that over the next 3, 4, 5 years, we'll be able to use these technologies to generate unbelievably interesting and new, hammering explosion of content.
I wasn't expecting you to say within that time frame. Not that, I'll hold you to it, because everything can happen in 5 years, and then we can repeat and say it's another 5 years time. Yeah. That feels very like Inception in terms of a dream within a dream within a dream. But it reminds me of a book I read by Eric Siegel called Predictive Analytics, which is an amazing read. And he talks around influence and kind of finding that the individuals that are on the margins that could go either way, yes, no, black, white, what have you. And around the image is that you and I could look at exactly the same Nike advert, but do the diametric opposite of what the advert is trying to do. So I'm trying to wrap my head, my tiny brain around this. In terms of, I understand the archetype, but is it you are almost trying to, I'm going to use the word predict, that might be wrong, but second guess what I see the images, and then second guess what my buyer persona, me as the buyer persona, what that narrative I will then create in my head to help, I guess, get to predictive or better qualitative prediction of what people are going to do, which is click to buy, right? Have I got that? Have I answered that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the short term, because you and I will probably be seeing the same billboard, we're going to have to just make a call in terms of the amount of type of footfall that are going to be looking at that billboard, and just expect that there will be some people that will construct a narrative in a way that we probably don't want them to. I often use the phrase, if I told you that my laptop was sick, that if you're old and boring like me, it probably means that it's broken. But if you're cool, then it means that it's awesome, right? So that sound can be constructed in two different narratives. And but I guess in the future where we might have a more augmented universe or metaverse, that content would be highly customized to you. And so whilst we might be looking at the same space, we would have different images shown to us. And this comes back to my chief AI officer hat, which is making sure that we're using these technologies for cool instead of creepy. You know, they are not only phenomenal at moving the needle, but they'll also be phenomenal at getting your attention and getting you to act. And we want to make sure that they're not being used to exploit people. But we're making sure that we're getting the right goods and services that are enriching people's lives.
Which, I've got, images of the Minority Report kind of flash into my head of Tom Cruise walking down the shopping mall, and, that AR experience that, he experiences. And I guess the world of marketing has always trodden a fine line between kind of we're doing this for the consumers versus we're doing this for us. And that's, that will continue forever and a day. It's just this concept of, I reflect back on, would you have to say that, you're talking to an avatar, which is AI generated on a website? Will there have to be disclaimers, very, very small print, no doubt, that actually this has been almost a quasi custom made for you based on the preferences that you no doubt have selected somewhere in terms of this is what you're interested in?
So the answer is yes. But what's interesting there, and this is a study that we're doing at the moment and validating, but we think that we've discovered that that human beings actually like or generated human beings more than human beings, which really puts an interesting question mark around the uncanny valley. And can you essentially create something that looks more human than a human for you to essentially buy into that and engage with it? And the second thing is that if I had an avatar presented to me on the screen, instead of there being a little thing disclaimer in the corner, would I be bought into it if that avatar said, "I'm not real," but this is what the conversation that we're going to have? So essentially, it removes some of those barriers.
I think there are multiple directions one could go with where this could go. But I guess in certain scenarios, the person would not want the avatar to open up with "I'm not real," because that could then destroy the illusion that is trying to be created.
Yeah.
I think people can probably infer where this probably will go in some shape or form. I guess it's it's back to, if you said this the world generally in terms of how we make those 10-year leaps in technology, and would you have said 10 years ago you could do this? No. And I posted the other day, my father-in-law found an old cassette tape, of my now wife, ironically, recording of her dance or singing at the school I was at, even though I didn't know from 1994. And he showed this cassette to my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old, and they're like, what the hell is that? But if we thought back then that we could do what we could do now, just in music alone, you'd have been off your absolute rocker, which is why, then let's kind of go with it around kind of AI. You touched on the metaverse. There's now big debate coming out around the metaverse and Meta in terms of what it has or hasn't done and the bets it hasn't made. And I'm assuming that that's going to have to be powered by, as I'm saying this, I know this is a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm assuming this is powered predominantly by AI and machine learning, all this very, very clever stuff. But where do you believe this will go in terms of that either augmented reality, so it's kind of the blend, or full VR and full immersion?
I think Apple's approach is probably the one I would bet on, which is augmented reality before full VR. But I think we will use those experiences in different ways. AR is often said to bring things to us. VR is often said we are taking to other places. And I think that those are different experiences. I think that in terms of the metaverse, there's lots of different definitions of the metaverse. And again, many of them are probably unhelpful, but they have certain kind of similar characteristics, like a persistent you, some sort of digital world. I think for me, the metaverse is just an acknowledgement that there's going to be a blending of the physical world and the digital world more and more over the coming decades. I mean, it's already happening, and it's just going to continue, both in our connected homes and once potentially these technologies around augmentation do start to take off and become more frictionless, then that's just going to accelerate. And I think that could open up a plethora, a Cambrian explosion of lots of interesting new experiences that will again enrich people's lives. So I'm actually super hopeful and buoyant about the metaverse. I'm also, what I'm concerned about, if I'm honest, is who owns the persistent you. So I think one characteristic of the metaverse is that there is a you that exists in the digital world, even when you go to sleep and even when you turn off all of your devices. And that persistent you, it essentially logs into the different universes, whether it be your gaming universe or your retail universe or whatever. Now, at the moment, what we do is we log into those universes using our Google login, our Facebook login, our Apple login. And my worry, if I'm honest, is that if we log in to the metaverse using those logins, it's those companies that will be able to have access to our data, that will have more and more kind of control over us. So I would like to see some sort of decentralized identity appear, where that identity is not belonged to by any corporate. It's belonged to by you.
Yeah.
Now what the business case looks like and things like that, I don't know. But I would certainly be trying to figure out, how we could create some sort of decentralized, identity so that data is yours and not somebody else's. And I know that Tim Berners-Lee and other people have been working on protocols to try to enable that type of, structure.
I'm glad that you shared that view, because I've always in the back of my mind at the moment wrestling with, I understand the concepts of a decentralization, but to your point, at the moment, you are attaching your avatar to an organization, even if it's not it's not the fangs anymore, it's the mangs. Even the smaller, who claim to be, we are decentralized, we're Web3, we're building on blockchain, yada yada. I'm like, yeah, but you're still sitting on a server somewhere, which is probably owned by one of the big players anyway, or a smaller player anyway. So I get it. And notwithstanding the whole, what's happening in the world of crypto and all that kind of stuff, and FTX and SBF and all that kind of stuff is not helping. The underlying technology is actually really good in terms of what it's built on, that narrative. I still struggle in my tiny mind to understand, could we ever truly get to a decentralized world in the purest sense? But maybe that's for the podcast. I don't know. Give your 5 minutes on it.
my 40-year plan is to try to create a decentralized world, or at least the foundations for one. So for over a decade, I've been trying to ask myself in Satalia, how do I create an organizational operating system to create essentially a liquid organization? I think there are two things I want to solve for. One is, how do you create an operating model that allows for the right group of people to swarm around an innovation and get that innovation to market as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. And that means not having traditional structures. It means creating the right structure according to the people and the innovation. And the hypothesis there is, if we can get innovations to market as fast as possible, innovation obviously often means removing frictions from things. And so I want to try and figure out, how can we remove the friction so much, which usually means human beings, from the creation and dissemination of goods like food and healthcare and education. So I want to try and create a platform that allows us to get goods to market as cheaply as possible. There's a concept called abundance. So I think that there is a possibility that we could create a world where people are born into it. They don't have to pay for food, for education, for healthcare. That it's all free. It's all abundant. But that requires you to remove all of the human labor, essentially, from the automation and creation of those goods. Mm-hmm. But if you can do that, then, and if you can create a platform that allows people to come up with new innovations, then you also have unlocked people from economic constraints. So you unlock people from economic constraints because they don't have to work to feed themselves. Mm-hmm. And now you've given them a platform to be able to contribute to humanity how they want. I believe that we all have an innate desire to want to make the world better for each other. Most of the people I know, they don't have to work. They're not bored at home. They're not depressed. They are using their time, their energy, their assets to try and make the world better. And I want to unlock as many people as possible from those economic constraints to be able to do that, which means, in some respects, trying to create a decentralized platform for the planet. Satalia is a micro version of that. WPP is slightly bigger, which I want to scale it to 100,000 people. And if we can get it to 100,000 people, I think I can get it to 10 billion.
Wow. I mean, I did not think we'd end up there, but that's why I have no constraints on these podcasts other than my intellect to just allow my guests to go where we want to go. That has been, wow, what a place to I think pause, because I want to get you back on to discuss more of this maybe, next year. But, Daniel, if, the listeners want to, find you, learn more about what, Satalia/WPP can do to help solve their, AI related questions, what's the best route to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or Daniel@Satalia.com. You can even phone me, 07737650097. But just get in touch any way you want.
And the eagle-eyed of you who are going to Daniel's profile will see that on his profile he has his telephone number, he has his email, and of course you can reach out to him through LinkedIn. If you do, and it's off the back of this podcast, please do mention that you've listened to Daniel share his ideas, and that's the reason you're getting in touch. It all helps. But Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for educating me. It's made me think things differently, but also I'm going to look at, are you a human, or when I get to these websites. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex.
And to all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I said to Daniel at the beginning of this episode, I believe, in fact, I know I'm going to stake it on this because I know where we're at. This podcast will get us across the 10,000 downloads mark. So Daniel, well done. But more importantly, thank you to my listeners so much listening, and those watching. This podcast would be nothing without you. So I really, really do appreciate it. If you want to be on the podcast, you know what to do. If you want to recommend people to be on the podcast, you know what to do. But for me and Daniel, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.